Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sunday at the Met. I'm Timothy Husband, curator in the Department of Medieval Art and the Cloisters, and will be doing the introductions today. As many of you know, last May marked the 75th anniversary of the Cloisters, and a number of events were organized around that to celebrate this long history of the Cloisters. Members will, of course, recognize the cover of the spring bulletin, which was entitled Creating the Cloisters. And it was an in-depth study of the genesis of the Cloisters from its very beginnings in the late 19th century right up until the completion of the structure and opening to the public in 1938. Most of the text relied almost exclusively on original archival research. So there's a great deal of new information, and it's frankly a good read and an illuminating story. So if you haven't read it or don't have a copy of it, I hope you'll take yourself to the bookstore and pick one up. Two exhibitions were organized for the celebratory year. The first one, in a nod to our unicorn tapestries, of course, one of the great treasures housed at the Cloisters, was called The Search for the Unicorn. And this explored the lore and the legend and the pseudoscience surrounding the unicorn. Here's a shot of the installation in the Romanesque hall with the unicorn in captivity in the back there. One of the pesky problems people writing about unicorns in the 15th and 16th century was trying to determine where this wonderful creature actually lived. And of course, those writing in Europe knew that it didn't live in Europe because it had never been seen. And likewise in Africa and subsequently Asia. So by the early 16th century, of course, the likely habitat was America. And so here you see a personification of America riding in a lovely carrosse drawn by two splendid unicorns. I think one of the things that amuses me the most about this is that the artist, Martin de Vos, summed up culture in America by naked natives fighting, human sacrifice, and one sole man over here tapping a tree for maple syrup. In the fall, we mounted an installation piece by the Canadian artist Janet Cardiff entitled 40-Part Motet, which is based on a musical composition of that title by Thomas Tallis, the great Elizabethan composer. The music itself is sublimely beautiful and deeply moving. The installation consists of one speaker for each of the 40 individual voices, arranged in groups of 5 into 8 different groups. And as each speaker amplify an individual voice, as you move about the space, as voices or groups of voices or the entire ensemble come into play, you have this wonderful reverberation of music within an architectural space so that music and space begin to merge. Normally it's produced in a pretty nascent sort of modern architectural space, but at the Cloisters it was, of course, presented in the 12th century apse from Fuentedueña in the Fore Hall. So it provided a particularly resonant space for this installation piece. Attendance exceeded our wildest expectations. These shots were taken towards the end of September, and on weekend days, the lines came out of the rotunda of the Cloisters, out of the Froville Arcade, down the upper drive and snaking well into the park. And on the right, you see sort of an average sort of visitation. Over the 3 months that the installation was there at the Cloisters, an astonishing 127,000 people came to see it. Capping off the 75th anniversary year is the exhibition Radiant Light, stained glass from Canterbury Cathedral, which opened this past Tuesday and runs through the 18th of May. This exhibition features 6 nearly life-size figures representing ancestors of Jesus Christ. The largest Ancestors of Christ series ever created, the ensemble originally comprised 86 figures, of which 43 survive. Depicted are Old Testament patriarchs who represent the generations of humankind from the creation to the coming of Christ, underscoring the medieval Christian belief that Old Testament prophecy was fulfilled in Christ. This series was based primarily on the Gospel of St. Luke. As a group, these figures symbolize the history and continuity of the Christian faith in very human terms from generation to generation as a sequence of fathers and sons. These figures were originally housed in the clerestory of Canterbury Cathedral, an aerial view of which you have here. The series began at the northeast corner of the central tower, continued all around the east end of the church, back down the south end, back to the southeast corner of the choir, the central tower. Here you have a view in the choir looking eastward, and a view of the one of the clerestory windows with the ancestor figures and their associated borders as they were originally installed. The large stained glass figures in the Ancestors of Christ are considered some of the finest surviving examples of monumental English medieval painting. The figures exhibited at the Cloisters, showing here Tara, are among the first in the series and date from 1178 to 1180. The almost sculptural gravity of the rendering of the draped bodies conveys an imposing presence. Equally impressive is the degree of psychological animation expressed in each unique character, while the group retains an overall feeling of substance and poise. The figures are complemented by a limited but rich palette and by broad and elaborately patterned borders, which you can see in this view of the installation of Tara over his son Abraham in the Romanesque hall at the Cloisters. When the figures were moved to the great south windows, the borders were left behind in the clerestory. This happened at the end of the 18th century. For this exhibition, the figures are reunited with their original borders and can thus be seen together for the first time in over 200 years. In the program this afternoon, we will learn much more of these spectacular windows, their history, significance, and context, all from varied but illuminating perspectives. It is my distinct privilege to introduce at this time our first and highly distinguished speaker. The very Reverend Dr. Robert Willis became Dean of Canterbury in 2001, following 9 years as Dean of Hereford. The Dean has been a member of the General Synod of the Church of England since 1985 and has chaired the Conference on Deans of English Cathedrals since 1999. He is a Deputy Lieutenant in the County of Kent and was given the Freedom of the City of Canterbury in 2008. He has an honorary doctorate of civil law from the University of Kent and a doctorate of divinity from Yale University. In 2012, he was awarded the Cross of St. Augustine by the Archbishop of Canterbury. He is a keen musician, pianist, and hymn writer. This afternoon, in his talk entitled Canterbury Pilgrims, Dean Willis will describe the historic and present context of the cathedral community for which the stained glass was created and which it is set. The story is 1,400 years long, so it will be a succession of snapshots from Augustine to Becket and Chaucer to Cromwell and on through the centuries to the present day. The creative life of the cathedral in music, stone, glass, and manuscripts will be a theme throughout, as we'll mention of modern commissions. Please welcome Dean Willis.
Can I begin by saying what an enormous pleasure it is to be here, and what a privilege it has been to bring the glass with friends from Canterbury, first to the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and now, since last Monday, to the Cloisters Museum. And there, I think it's been displayed with a wonder and sensitivity that has astounded us all. And I'd like to thank Tim for his work in that, and all those at the Met and at the Cloisters who've helped us, and also at the Getty Museum as well, particularly Geoffrey Weaver, who's been involved with Léonie Seliger, our own head of stained glass, in bringing this project to a successful conclusion. These old ancestors, 6 of them were allowed to come, were taken down from the south window because in 2009 a piece of stone from one of the long mullions split away, and in order to recarve the stone, which is a work now in progress, and it's being done out on the lawns of Canterbury Cathedral, so a vast window, by our own staff. There are 350 full-time staff, paid staff at Canterbury Cathedral with hundreds of volunteers. All of those paid staff are experts, and we've done it outside so that people coming to the cathedral can access the creative skills of those who are involved. But meanwhile, the glass, and that's not being restored, that's in very good condition, thanks to Léonie and her team, was in store. We put it on light boxes, and people began to enjoy it. And it was then that the Getty had the imagination to say, well, maybe it could cross the Atlantic. Of the 24 panels that were down, 12 were asked for, and the English government, being a bit mean, said, well, you can have 6, because they're the ones who ensure such a work of fine art and historic sensitivity, leaving a World Heritage Site, which Canterbury is. As Tim said, this is a 1400-year history. And I like to quote, as I did here in New York the other night, Lord Astor's strapline when he was collecting money following the disastrous Baedeker raid, the bombing of Canterbury in the Second World War, when the city turned into a fireball on the south side of the cathedral, and the cathedral itself narrowly escaped destruction. And Lord Astor, in collecting that money, had the lines, Augustine founded it, Becket died for it, Chaucer wrote about it, Cromwell shot at it, Hitler bombed it, time is destroying it, will you save it? It's a pretty good strapline, but it actually helps me bounce through history and show you something of what is there. Here is Canterbury Cathedral as you see it now. The community was founded by St. Augustine when he was sent by Gregory the Great to bring Christianity, shall we say, back to the shores of the British Isles, but to the English for the first time. For the British who had been there under Roman rule when Christianity had first come to England had gone far to the west, and now Augustine came as a missionary to pagan lands. You remember the story of how 2 little Anglo-Saxon slaves were meant to be in the slave market in Rome, and Gregory saw them, and he said, who are they? And the slave man said, oh, they're Angles, they're not Christians. And the Gregory, who was not yet Pope, said, non Angli, sed Angeli, not Angles, but angels, because of how they looked. There's a comic history book in the United Kingdom which renders the translation not angels, but Anglicans. But Augustine decided that, or rather Gregory decided, he would himself come to England. He became Pope and could not, and sent Augustine with 40 monks instead. He had one shot and turned back because he grew afraid of what was there. Gregory sent him on again, and he landed, and found to his surprise that the Queen of that part of England in 597, when the mission took place, was already Christian, because she was French, and already had a little church built where her chaplain said Mass. That church of St. Martin is still there. And she helped Augustine convert her husband, King Ethelbert, who then gave land for a cathedral church here, the mother church not only of England, but of English-speaking Christians throughout the world. It predates any breakdown of denominations by hundreds of years, and therefore is a symbol of great unity and held precious as a holy space and pilgrim space by Christians of all denominations. Ethelbert gave land next for a cathedral in Rochester, and then for a cathedral at St. Paul's in London. And so the first three cathedrals were founded from that mission in Canterbury before the York Cathedral happened under Paulinus. But what you see now, of course, is nothing like the church that was built by St. Augustine. Nothing there really predates Norman times. And the central tower, which is known as Bell Harry Tower, from the bell which chimes from the top of it, was not really completed until almost before the Reformation. Lots and lots of work was done on it before it looked like that. But that's how it looks now, and it's how pilgrims see it coming over the hill. Sometimes at night, it looks to them like that. That's obviously a Christmas picture with the crib or creche standing outside. It's a life-size one that the children feel bound almost to walk into. But I'm showing it to you because, of course, it inspires a sense of absolute wonder. And Canterbury Cathedral, when you say it, is no more than that which has been created by those who have surrounded for 1,400 years in almost unbroken succession the throne or chair of the Archbishop of Canterbury. There are two truths that I want to establish right at the beginning of what I'm saying, and perhaps I'll return to them at the end. There is really only a present tense about Canterbury. Everything one looks back to in history and all the past tenses that we use are only a reflection of what is. The creative community is still there in full power and strength, and there has never been a time in history when the cathedral has been better kept by more expert people and when more new commissions are being taken. So be aware that when you read a verb in the past tense in any description of Canterbury, you need in your mind to convert it straight away into the present tense and say, and all that is still going on in total continuity. I remember going to New Zealand once to help the Archbishop of New Zealand plan his next 10 years and being invited into the Maori Marae and was told that Bishop Selwyn, when he first went to New Zealand, began to try to teach sacramental Christian theology and say, of course, when we celebrate the Mass, although we're remembering something in the past, it is in the present that we're... And the Maori said, well, of course, everything is like that, because they don't think in time such as we do consecutively. Everything that was is, and all that went into one actually goes on, and what is will be, and so on. It's very Western to think in time consecutively. Well, I want you to think a little bit like that about Canterbury this afternoon, because what was is in a very big way. And the second truth is you don't really experience it unless you come to us and live our life, even for 24 hours, better still for a week or two. And happily, we have in the precincts of Canterbury Cathedral, courtesy of houses being destroyed, our own hotel or lodge, which people can come to and share the life with scholars staying there in lovely ensuite rooms. But that means that you actually taste the creativity of the place, body, mind, and spirit, and have your own creativity and human gifts encouraged, so that you yourself may come away from your pilgrimage with all your humanity enlarged and in some way refreshed. Canterbury is right in the middle of a particular city, and here it is through the narrow streets of quite a small city in England, really only about 30,000 people. If you discount the university students, Canterbury has a higher percentage of students per head of the population than any city in Europe, save Heidelberg and the citizens enjoy all the comings and goings of the 3 different universities, and so creative life is all around. Inside, one is awed by the great space of the nave. At the moment, those chairs are not there. For 1 month of the year, in February, we take them away so that people may feel and sense the architectural Gothic space which was meant to put people in their place, to give human beings a perspective. And I find 2 kinds of perspectives in that nave. The first perspective is of me as very small and something of the wonder and continuity of the Creator, that which we in a religious sense would call divine, but which speaks to many different kinds of human beings in different ways. And the other kind of perspective I get is from the sense that most of the people that I meet in the nave, we have about 1.4 million visitors every year, I shall never meet again in the whole of my life, and it teaches me that I'm part of a vast humanity, and I have somehow to take account of that when I'm thinking of the importance of my own individuality. Here beyond the pulpit and arch is the very decorated choir, and above it the throne of St. Augustine, the chair of St. Augustine. This is a very French space, and the whole of Canterbury Cathedral is built of French stone. If you can imagine how near France is to the coast of Kent, and Canterbury is really only 8 miles from the coast of Kent, it's 21 miles then across to Calais. So on a calm day, it's much easier to float stone across than to drag it by land from English quarries. And so from Caen, the stone was brought, beautiful, slightly salmon-coloured, creamy stone, which responds so well to the sunshine. And that stone has been used to build Canterbury by our expert nations and is still being used to build Canterbury. And sometimes when stones are taken away, we carve them to put in new cathedral churches as they are built to get an organic unity across the world. So in San Francisco Cathedral and St. John the Divine, you find the Canterbury stone with the Canterbury cross on. Washington National Cathedral is different because the whole pulpit is built out of stones from Canterbury Cathedral and is called the Canterbury pulpit, a gift from Canterbury when the National Cathedral was built. And below the crypt, very big, it seats 600, but in the midst, the altar of Our Lady Undercroft, which is probably the most holy and historic part of the cathedral, and people sense that. I've known cardinals and Orthodox patriarchs fall on their knees just there and say afterwards, that was where I felt it most. And it's never better expressed than by the scholar Erasmus, who came there to see the shrine of Becket, found that a little bit too sort of glittery, and went downstairs and wrote in his diary, "Here I found a habitation of the Virgin, fairer far than any I had seen." And still that is maintained. And the crypt is the one place in the cathedral is as it was when Becket was murdered, because above a disastrous fire took the rest of the cathedral down. It was to these places that pilgrims came. But more important, in a sense, than the shrine of Becket was the throne, and is the throne, of St. Augustine, where only a year ago, less than a year ago, on March the 21st, I enthroned the latest occupant of that throne, Justin Welby, as the Archbishop of Canterbury. 10 years before, I had done the same for Rowan Williams. The throne, of course, was not like that in Augustine's day. No doubt Saxons used wooden chairs, and this one probably dates from about the 11th century, but it's been the throne of the Archbishop since then. And to come towards it, one feels, right, this is a different sign of what it means to be a cathedral, for if that chair was not there, the cathedral church would not be a cathedral church. It would be like Westminster Abbey, a big church and very beautiful, but not a cathedral. Canterbury is only a cathedral because the cathedra, the chair of Augustine, is there, on which sits, in the present tense, a human being. And therefore, when people come and say, so point to what dates from 597, one can say, well, in human terms, the human person of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and also the human community saying its prayers, studying and working daily around him in continuity for 1400 years. But also in terms of artifact, just one thing comes to mind: the Augustine Gospels. Those are the Gospels which Gregory gave to Augustine to bring to England and convert the English with. And they've been tested, carbon tested, and every test proves them to be from Italy at that time. And there is really no doubt whatsoever, but they're the Gospels that Augustine brought. I'm there holding them so that before I enthrone the Archbishop, he may make his oath of faithfulness to his ministry and to the human community of Canterbury on the Gospels which the person who founded that community brought with them 1,400 years or more before. And then follows the seating of an Archbishop of Canterbury in the chair of St. Augustine, and around stand not only the primates, the archbishops of the Anglican Communion worldwide, but leaders of all kinds of other denominations, other faiths, and also political leaders and ambassadors from the nations from which those people come, together with figures from our own government and royal family. And it's a time of massive celebration. But the moment, in a sense, they step inside the cathedral, they themselves become pilgrims. And one notices, even with the most important of the religious representatives, political representatives, royal representatives, there is a sense of awe and wonder at stepping inside a place which was and is a holy place of pilgrimage. Augustine founded it. Becket died for it. But first, we have the perhaps the most important document that we hold apart from the Gospels of Augustine. It's a document setting out the priority and primacy of Canterbury over York. And the fact that it needed to be done was because William the Conqueror, coming to re-establish order in the land that he had conquered in 1066, brought the two archbishops together because he knew he had to have, should we call it, line management. And so he set the two archbishops the task of working that out. And there it is, with William the Conqueror's cross, and he put that there because he couldn't write his name, Lanfranc's signature, the signature of the papal legate, and 5 other bishops, and they all write subscripsi, we sign, and underneath this document, establishing Canterbury's primacy as the mother church, the Archbishop of York, John, writes, concedo, I concede. And that document is still held in our library, together also with documents attached to the event which made Canterbury a centre of pilgrimage par excellence and of such importance. This is the site of the murder of Thomas Becket in 1170. And although there had been pilgrims coming before, after all, St. Alphege was buried there, who'd been murdered by the Danes and was considered very much a Christian martyr. Here is the one which made Canterbury absolutely the centre point of pilgrimage. And at that spot, in a well-attested way, for monks witnessed it, and all of them were literate and wrote what they saw, the very violent end to Thomas by 4 knights who thought they were doing the bidding of King Henry II. You will know the story too well for me to have to tell it again. At that spot, on the 29th of December 1170, Thomas was cut down and brutally murdered. And the terrified monks carried his body down into the crypt. We reenact this liturgically on December the 29th every year, and hundreds of pilgrims by candlelight come and stand around and walk around the cathedral as the Archbishop leaves his throne, as Vespers is continued to be sung, and he stands here. And then the doors crash open, and there's a moment of great silence, and then we go into the crypt where the body was taken. Over the site where the body first lay in the crypt, here's a new commission, the English sculptor Anthony Gormley has now created a body in medieval nails taken from the roof of the cathedral when it was being restored. He's called it Transport because, as he said, your experiences pass through your body. It's how you actually become you, and the cathedral too is full of people passing through all the time. But those nails which form the body with It looks as though there are lines drawn around the body, but there aren't. That's just suggested by the nails. However you walk around it, the nails are suggesting the lines of the human form. Some of them go inwards to show that a human being can receive pain, like the Archbishop on that day, or Christ himself. And some come outwards to show that throughout the world, human beings are capable of giving pain. Here too is a sign of the instant, almost 4 years it took, very speedy canonization of Thomas Becket. And in Limoges enamel caskets around the world, the relics of Becket were sent to the medieval sites. And you will find many museums holding those now. When I was Dean of Hereford, we still had a casket in which Becket's relics were sent to us. Pilgrim steps. One has seen so many people walk up those steps to the site of the shrine now. It's wonderful to think that pilgrimage is one of the massive growth points of human experience in Europe today. Ever since the Second World War, the pilgrimage has been growing and growing, and no day goes by without us receiving or setting off pilgrims on their route. And these steps, worn with pilgrims' feet, or pilgrims' knees, because the tradition was to walk up them on your knees, are one of the centre points of Canterbury Cathedral. And here now, the point of the shrine. When Chaucer's pilgrims, telling their stories, came along the road to Canterbury, it was to this particular shrine, which in those days contained the body of Becket, built high. Henry II had tried to destroy Becket by killing him, although that wasn't his intention. His temper caused his knights to do so. He certainly wanted the power of Becket cut down, but in fact it grew, of course. And we know that from the numbers of pilgrims coming. And then Henry VIII destroyed the shrine, but the lamp still burns on the position of the shrine 24 hours a day, and pilgrims come in their thousands still. So if one tried to snuff the light out, somehow it was relit by the faithfulness of those who somehow found power in the creativity of the Christian message and also the creative message of that Benedictine community. The great truth of the rule of St. Benedict was that a human being is valued in body, mind, and spirit, so that all those things, those aspects of the creative gifts of humanity were exercised each day in community, but a community given to hospitality. And those tenets still rule our life as a community in Canterbury. On each side of the shrine, important people lie. Henry IV on one side, the Black Prince on the other, because they had wanted somehow to touch that vision of Becket and reach the beyond. And before the site of martyrdom, all kinds of pilgrims have come. Here is John Paul II kneeling at the site of the shrine of Becket, at the site of the murder of Becket. And later he went up to the shrine and held the Gospels of St. Augustine in his hand. But down there by the site of the murder, he lit a candle for Maximilian Kolbe, who had given his life in Auschwitz for another, as Archbishop Robert Runcie, the Archbishop there, lit a candle for Janani Luwum, the murdered Archbishop of Uganda. The Pilgrims' Water Stoop. For years and years after the Reformation, it was not there. It had been taken away when the Reformation happened, and one had noticed I've been only 13 years there, but one noticed as people came in, they would look around with their hand to see where the water was, to both refresh themselves and bless themselves. And so now we've placed the water stoop back. Another modern commission by Stephen Cox, the English marble sculptor, created and carved out of Hammamet Bracha marble from the oldest working quarry in the Mediterranean region, used by Cleopatra and also by Philip of Macedon. It's a beautiful stone, and when the light shines on the water, it looks like a stream bed. But I had it carved in the position of not just a water stoop that Catholic, Anglican and Orthodox Christians could bless themselves in and remind themselves of their baptism, but also as when one enters an African household, and so many other cultures' households, someone comes forward with a bowl of water to refresh you as a traveller, as a journeyer. And so it's at that waist level with the two handholds on each side. Well, you will all know why T.S. Eliot is there. That is taken at the first performance in Canterbury Cathedral of the Murder in the Cathedral, which Beckett wrote for Canterbury, was first performed in Canterbury, and performed by Canterbury people. And yet he wrote it in a way like a Greek tragedy, with a chorus, and as it's declaimed, one has a sense of timelessness and also of themes going through faith and humanity, themes of martyrdom and sacrifice, and themes of community and of tragedy and of success through tragedy. Beckett's last Christmas sermon is set out in this, and Eliot's words are used at several times during the reenactment of the day of Beckett's murder each year when the hundreds of pilgrims are there on December the 29th. The Black Prince, who himself had wanted to be near to Beckett, and he is buried there with his accoutrements hanging above him, and it shows still the sense of importance that was given then, and also still, which is the most often asked question in Canterbury Cathedral, where was Becket killed? Because the event still horrifies somehow that an archbishop could be cut down in his own cathedral in the days of Christmastide in a holy place. When we had the exhibition in the Getty, there was a small psalter of the same generation as the windows, which Léonie will talk about in a moment, and one could compare the tiny artwork of the psalter with the massive artwork of the windows. One aspect was missing, the massive artwork of wall painting, which can't be travelled across the Atlantic, of course, without taking the walls down. But there is some there. A lot of walls have been whitewashed or cleaned, but this kind of art, telling the story in a way which is pictorial and which people can relate to in colour, is around. At the same time, tiny charters give a sense of the civilizations. This is the Godwin Charter, pre-Norman conquest, but showing in those Saxon times the ordering and the patterns of life in a civilization that we sometimes discount because it comes before the Norman conquest. And over the grave of St. Anselm, here, a new commission of Aosta marble, where Anselm was converted and born and converted on the mountaintop amongst the snows, sensing himself being invited into the banquet of heaven. Stephen Cox carved this, and the linings and veinings on the altar, if you imagine yourself the priest standing the other side and looking towards us, suggests that you're standing amongst the Alps. That altar was consecrated by Rowan Williams and by the Bishop of Aosta and the Abbot of Bec in an ecumenical service, which then lifted Anselm as one of those saints, as well as Becket and Alphege, that pilgrims came and heard the story of as they walk around. I've put Magna Carta in simply because it acts as a sort of foundation stone to the laws both of England and was influential in this nation as well. Magna Carta had a precursor by several hundred years from King Ethelbert, whose Textus Refensis is already beginning to feel towards the rule of law, which ended with this. And of course, Stephen Langton, the Archbishop, who was significant in making King John seal this Magna Carta, is buried in Canterbury Cathedral. Then music. This is the bust of Orlando Gibbons. Tim mentioned Tallis. Tallis was a singer in Canterbury Cathedral Choir, and his music is, of course, still sung. Gibbons came down to conduct the music, I'm sure much of it was his music, at the wedding of King Charles I to Henrietta Maria, and his Renaissance bust is there in Canterbury Cathedral because he died during those ceremonies and was laid to rest. But music is something which goes on daily. We have now 3 choirs. The boys' choir, which you see there looking very traditional at Christmastide, who sing evensong most days of the academic year. A girls' choir, newly started, of a different age, 14 to 18, who give a different kind of voice, a very strong sound of young women. And also our cathedral, our King's School choir, of boys and girls, who sing the offices in the cathedral when the school is present. All of those are singing the music which pilgrims and worshippers and people coming in their hundreds, many from the continent of Europe, come to hear. And Canterbury is still, this is a watercolour, but Canterbury is still set out in the countryside. It's a place where pilgrims come telling their stories just as they used to in the days of Chaucer. It's a place of great hospitality. It's a place of gardens. There's a new commission. Down that pole are the first words of Dante's great poem, the first words of the Inferno, the first section of that poem. And beside is the cathedral cat, who until the cathedral cat died about 4 months ago and we buried Laptop in the garden there, always came to morning prayer, never missing, and would meow outside the door if the door was locked and we had to go and let him in before we started the psalms. But here in the garden of my house, many pilgrims, many who come simply to join each other, are given hospitality. For you remember, as I said, the Benedictine rule is a rule which respects humanity in body, mind, spirit, in all creativity, helping and encouraging each other in community, and a community given to hospitality. So I've included that picture simply to show hospitality of different nations coming together. Sometimes the visitors are important. There's Her Majesty the Queen, who's come on a royal maundy, and sometimes they have come for a very specific reason. There, King George VI, Queen Elizabeth, his wife, whom we later knew as the Queen Mother, and Princess Elizabeth on the right in the arch there, had come to give thanks for the saving of the cathedral from bombing in the Second World War, when so much of the precincts and the cathedral library and canons' houses were destroyed in the middle of that fireball, and when 4 old men on the roof threw the incendiary bombs off onto the floor with their bare hands. I've included this picture because it was a sign of beginning again. It's the cup of hospitality, both at the altar and also of the wine cup of the people coming to be our guests. Around the knop of this cup, given to us by Thomas Arundel to start again after the cathedral had been practically taken apart in Reformation and Civil War, is the head of a horse and the head of a dog and the head of a lion. And down at the bottom, on the base, there's a pattern of those 3 very different animals, quite often hostile to each other, standing in amity. And below is the text, Concordia cum candore, unity, but with honesty. It's a great lesson for us who gather communities together. For when they tell their story, quite often there is disagreement, but if you smother the disagreement, the people aren't really learning one another well or knowing each other honestly. If they're in the rhythms of life at Canterbury, living with us for long, they learn one great lesson, which the young Anglican seminarians who come from right across the world and spend time with us for 3 weeks or so in the summer, they always go away saying, I learned here in the midst of life to be friends with people with whom I disagreed radically. And it's wonderful to me that in the last couple of days here in New York and in Philadelphia, I've met, just by accident, 2 of those scholars who came up and said, oh, you're Dean Willis. We were Canterbury scholars who lived this life back in 2011, one, 2009, the other. It was one of the most important things that we ever did because it taught us that. My 2 original points again. Canterbury is in the present. The pilgrims still come. The stories are still being told. The creativity is still there, resting on that deep root and guarding and conserving its treasures to show that deep root. And also, despite the fact that I've done my best to show that community, you don't really learn it or feel it in your heart and the way in which your life is reshaped until you come and live it. So please come and join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Willis, for that wonderfully informative and indeed inspirational talk. Our second speaker is Léonie Seliger, Director of Stained Glass at Canterbury Cathedral. After a traditional apprenticeship in stained glass design and manufacture, Léonie worked as a glass painter and glazier in her native Germany. In 1991, she moved to the UK to join the team of Canterbury Cathedral's stained glass conservation department, where she received her training in conservation, becoming the studio senior conservator and glass painter in 1995. In 2001, she graduated from York University with an MA in Conservation Studies. She advises the Diocese of Canterbury and Rochester on the restoration and conservation of historic stained glass, as well as on new designs for windows. She is also a consultant to the Cathedral of Uppsala in Sweden. In 2006, she took over as Director of Stained Glass Conservation at Canterbury Cathedral, with the responsibility for the care of the cathedral's internationally renowned collection of stained glass. The studio is involved in research both nationally and internationally. In addition, it also carries out conservation projects for many other places, amongst them Gloucester Cathedral and Westminster Abbey. In her talk this afternoon, entitled Age-Old Splendor, Splendor's Old Age, Preserving Canterbury Cathedral's Medieval Stained Glass Windows, Léonie will introduce us to many of the challenges of preserving some of the most important medieval stained glass in existence. Please welcome Léonie.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to join Jean Willis in expressing my gratitude for, first of all, the chance to bring the ancestors of Christ to the United States and to New York, and for being invited to speak to you today. Now, what I would like to try and do is give you a bit of a sense of what these splendid figures of the ancestors of Christ went through to make it through time and space to the cloisters. What strikes me when I see people looking at the exhibition in the cloisters is the disbelief that these wonderful figures could actually be that old. They look brand new. Are they really that old? Well, just like a pilgrim who may have had a wash and a comb after his long journey, you do need to ask them, what did you meet on your journey? What did you go through? And so that's what I'm going to try and do. The Dean very generously stayed away as much as he could in a place like Canterbury Cathedral from photos showing the stained glass. Now, don't think that there isn't stained glass in the cathedral. In fact, it is a glass house. There is the Trinity Chapel, surrounded by windows telling the stories of the miracles of Thomas Becket. And in the clerestory level, the high level, some of the ancestors of Christ just faintly visible. That was the position we were just in, looking east. And if we move further west but still look east, we get this view. Now where is that? Here we go. And the ancestors lived, and some of them still live, in that upper register circling this eastern part of the building, all the way around here. Now, the Dean mentioned the Reformation, and that was certainly a problematic time for the cathedral and for the cathedral's treasures. But it actually got worse 150 years later, when Puritan iconoclasts visited, and they didn't mince words, as you can see. They called the place that most idolatrous cathedral, the painted Jezebel. And this is from an account that the leader of these iconoclasts, Richard Culmer, gave of his activities in the cathedral. When the commissioners entered in that cathedral, they knew not where to begin. The images and pictures were so numerous, as if the superstitious cathedral had been built for no other end but to be a stable for idols. You can hear him foam at the mouth, can't you? And then he goes on very proudly, listing his achievements. Many images were defaced in windows there. Several pictures of God the Father, of crucifixes and men praying to crucifixes and to the Virgin Mary. He's probably proud of what he did. Now, it is a stroke of immense luck. It's practically miraculous to have an eyewitness account from the other side, if you will, by an artist called Thomas Johnson, who painted this picture about 14 years after the deed. This may look like, your run-of-the-mill view of the interior of a cathedral, 1657, but actually you need to look a little bit closer. You notice that group of people here in the choir. Well, that is probably Richard Culmer himself there. And then you notice, well, hang on, what are they doing perched on the choir stalls? What's he holding in his hand? And then you look further and you realize, no, there's somebody there. On the walkways, right outside the windows, those windows would have contained lives of saints. And this guy, I think, may be holding a pistol. This guy definitely is holding a hammer. It gets better. Look at that area here. There is somebody perched on the windowsill with a long iron pole bashing a window out. And you can actually see the window jamb, the exterior jamb of the window through the smashed area here, whereas where he couldn't reach, up there, the stained glass is still in position. And just in case you were wondering how accurate is this, well, that is that very position now. That's Henry Eastry's effigy. Eastry was prior in the late 13th and early 14th century. And just to sort of direct your attention to those two little pillars here, well, they're there. And even the curve of that ledge is actually a curve. So I think we can trust the man to get it right. Over there is the sister window to the one that is being bashed out here. And that, just like this, contained, and this one in fact still contains, some of the stories illustrating the Old and the New Testament and concepts connected with that. So this is one of the surviving 12th century panels from that typological window. The subject here is not one that is in the Bible. It is Christ leading the Gentiles away from pagan gods. And I absolutely adore it because it's so very brutally honest. Don't worry about it, our temple is just like the other temple, and we have an altar just like you had before. Don't worry, nothing much will change. Well, we have a crucifix, but you had an idol. So the only thing that's different, you have to get a little bath before you come to us. But of course, these bits here aren't real. They are Victorian restorations. So, although those iconoclasts did go at it with some verve and smashed entire windows, they also, probably later on when the protests got louder and louder, and in fact Richard Culmer had to be protected by armed guards because the people of Canterbury were ready to tear him limb from limb, probably a little later on they became a little bit more surgical and only removed the very figure that was objectionable from the panel. And I think it's really wonderful to see that this is Christ, and there is one of the crucifixes that Culmer himself mentions. Culmer got into hot water about his actions. He was asked to justify himself, and he basically said, well, I'm sorry, I was only following orders. And well, somebody said, well, excuse me, but you destroyed Christ, but you left the devil intact? And Carmel said, well, the devil was never mentioned in my orders, only Christ. Oh. So there you are, there's the Victorian restoration. So what about the 86 ancestors? Were they smashed up? Well, astonishingly, again, this picture does contain an image of one of those windows in situ. And it's up there. Oh, there you go. You only see a part of the window. But if we put next to the location where the stained glass is, the actual stained glass panels that still survive from that very window and are still in situ, I think you get a sense that he's actually doing a portrait. I was very excited. I only found this 4 days ago, and I spent the small hours of the morning just, looking for more little treasures. So there we have a portrait of Isaac in situ, which is rather special. Now, what about this guy? Is he there to smash up the figures? Well, Isaac's still there, so clearly he didn't do any harm to him. And I actually think what he's doing there is not carrying a weapon. He's carrying, well, he seems to be carrying a bag. So what could he be up to? I think what he's up to, he's going to make his way over all the way to the east. Remember, we have these wonderful walkways in front of the window, so you can walk along the sill level of the windows. All the way to the east window of the Trinity Chapel, which did contain something other than the ancestors. And that is an enlargement of that very area. And you'll see that there are, bits that seem to be missing. Now, I've superimposed the actual surviving medieval glass with the bits that were gone in the Middle Ages, blanked out on that. And that's probably scary now. The accuracy of this is just, look at that. The top panel, in fact, is in America. It's one of the very few pieces of Canterbury glass that isn't in Canterbury Cathedral. This is in the Richmond Museum of Fine Art in Virginia. And the area that I've blanked out is actually the one that was smashed up then. And wonderfully, the mission statement of Canterbury Cathedral is to show people Jesus, and I am about to do exactly that. There he is. That's why that section was smashed, because it was Christ in majesty, flanked by the Virgin and the apostles. Now, one back. Why was this guy making his way to a window that had been smashed with a bag in his hand? Remember, glass was incredibly valuable, and you had a building full of holes in the windows. So presumably, the place would have been ankle deep in glass fragments, and somebody would have gone around and picked them all up, put them in bags, in boxes, in chests, and then used them later to fix the windows in some way or other, patch them up. Now, we're fast-forwarding another 40 years. By that time, the cathedral had begun to repair its windows, its smashed windows, with plain glazing. And two of our largest windows, the Great West window and the Great South window, had lost considerable amounts of their original glazing, although the West window fared better than the South window. But this is roundabout what you can imagine them to have looked like at the end of the 17th century, mostly plain glazed with little bits of stained glass in the south window here. This is an example of one of those lancet heads. Unfortunately, by the end of the 18th century, the great south window was crumbling and was so dilapidated, the stonework was so dilapidated that the decision was made to completely take down all the glass, in this case mostly just plain glass, and all of the stonework, creating a giant hole in the building, that size, 18 meters high, and rebuilt, using some of the medieval stone, but also introducing an awful lot more new stone. Now, when they came to then reglaze the window, stained glass was back in fashion again. And they knew perfectly well what was missing in those lancets, because they still had the example of the west window. Large figures, life-sized figures. Where do we get those from? Let's think, have we got life-sized figures knocking about the place somewhere? Actually, yes. Conveniently off the peg, ready-made, and so that's exactly what they did. They took down an awful lot of the surviving ancestor figures, chopped them to size, required a couple of inches off the sides, bit of the top, bit of the bottom, to make them fit the south window and the west window. And so here is a plan of what roundabout the situation was at the end of the 18th century. The black spaces are the windows that had lost their stained glass by that time, not necessarily to iconoclasm, but just neglect, high winds, people throwing stones possibly, but mostly it's just neglect. And so I've just learned how to do this. This is what happened. They took the ancestors out of the clerestory and stuffed them into the west window and into the south window, creating beautiful confections, enormous carpets of stained glass. But the context, of course, was lost. The meaning was so much diminished because the father-son correlation between the figures was lost, and some of them look left, some of them look right. There is a reason for that. All that was gone. By the end of the 18th century, nobody really cared very much about that. So here we have a reglazed window using old glass in the practically brand new stonework at that point. Now we're going into the 19th century, and Canterbury Cathedral is really quite unique in having had the care of the glass in the hands of one family for, well, nearly 150 years. And this is father, son, nephew, and son. And very conveniently, you only have to remember two names because they were quite unimaginative in naming their sons. This gentleman here, Samuel Caldwell Jr., actually started working with his father in 1878. So if you join that up, his career spanned 74 years. This is not when he was born and when he died. This is when he started working. And when he was forced to retire at the age of 96, he then lived on to 103, something like that. Couldn't kill the man. Just to make the point, lead is not necessarily going to kill you. It might make you funny, but yeah. So what were these guys up to? Well, some of them were actually very good restorers that cared for the original material and tried to keep it as much as possible, repair it rather than replace it. Others had other ideas and were quite happy to repair and replace. All of them took the glass panels apart, discarded the lead, and then re-leaded everything with new lead. So very sadly, we don't have any medieval lead in the windows anymore. But it also means that our windows are now very, very nice and sturdy when it comes to the lead matrix. The kind of picture they would have been confronted with was this: patched up windows. Remember the guy with the bag? This is the result of that kind of activity. In fact, somebody here very generously tried to at least put a face where there was a missing head. But, the rest is bits of drapery, and I have no idea what that's supposed to be doing there. Now, this is not as accurate as Thomas Johnson's painting, but if you actually look at the real surviving stained glass panel, you will find that, it's not so bad. And Again, this is not iconoclasm, this is probably schoolboys throwing stones, because this was exposed on the south side of the cathedral. It doesn't show any saints. Oops, what happened? I didn't do it. Maybe somebody thought I was overrunning. I don't think I was, not yet. So neglect actually played quite a great part in the decay of the cathedral's windows. And so the 19th century restorers did a hugely important job in repairing the windows and making them sturdy enough to come to us. It's easy to be dismissive of 19th century restoration. Without it, we wouldn't have anything to work with. So I'm sure what we do will find critics in the future as well. Let's see. Hello. Yes, I'm Thank you very much. Where am I? They basically took out all those later editions, those incongruous pieces of stained glass, and then, with a lot of knowledge, with a lot of research, reinstated what was lost in the best possible manner. And they were very good glass painters. And so we are now in the position to actually look at these. There you go, and it's fast forwarded to where I wanted to be. Look at these panels as they should be seen. This is high quality restoration. The story of Adam the Forester, by the way, is a rather amusing one. He was shot in the neck in the woods. Is that okay? I won't tell you the story of Adam the Forester, sorry. Moving on. Another thing they did was, of course, well, you have orphaned ornamental borders in the clerestory windows with nothing in the middle. All the figures, or most of the figures, were taken out and put in the west and south window. So they took the opportunity when they re-leaded and restored the windows, the glazing of the west and south window sometime in the middle of the 19th century, to make very accurate drawings of the original figures and then make copies. So there you have the copy of Lamech, and you can see the original Lamech in the cloisters. You know, they did a fairly good job. Maybe not perfect, but it certainly restored the splendor of the choir clerestory back to where it should be. Yes, and then we had that little unpleasantness with, I don't know, what nation was it? This is a shot of the cathedral nave, hip deep under, well, more than hip deep, under sand, being packaged into sandbags, ready to have monuments covered up in case the cathedral should collapse. And you can see the west window is actually devoid of the large figures. They were created up in time before the bomb blasts shattered any windows. And they were stored in the crypt for safekeeping. So that's how our medieval glass survived the war. And it was very necessary. There's a shot showing the south window after bombs had exploded in the precincts right outside the cathedral and shaken the building so much that the glass and the temporary boarding was torn out. Now, of course, all the glass was reinstated. And then in 1973, the current stained glass conservation studio was founded. So last year we celebrated our 40th anniversary. We have 9 staff. We take in work from other places than the cathedral as well, but our main reason to be is the cathedral's stained glass. Our task now is to deal with the ravages of time quite apart from what people do to the glass. The glass itself, being chemically more unstable than modern glass, is falling apart. And the main culprit of that is water. Medieval glass is more water-soluble than modern glass. Modern glass is also water-soluble, it just takes a lot longer. So what you see here is the same leaf inside with transmitted light and outside in reflected light, one of those leaves here. And it's quite shocking to think that what my colleague Grace, who actually came to help install the glass here at the Cloisters, what my colleague Grace is seeing under the microscope is, oh, by the way, this is our favorite tool, a 000 sable brush. What she's seeing under the microscope is that thick crusts of salts that have developed as a result of slow corrosion. And those are very carefully removed because they are very soft. On the outside, often the crusts are so hard that it would require more force than we are willing now to exert to remove them. So we leave them in place because really the most important thing is to prevent the corrosion from getting any worse than it is already. They are 830 years old. They're allowed to have a few wrinkles, you know. So there's phallic from the outside, in transmitted light on the left, and in reflected light, the bottom half of him, from the outside. And if we look at that area in close-up, you realize all is not that well. So in 1975, when the studio had just basically gotten its feet on the ground, the very first job we did was to take the glazing of the Great South Window out yet again, and this time to very gently clean the surfaces, consolidate fractures, make sure that flaking glass paint is consolidated. In some cases, take apart and re-lead. In other cases, just leave the panels intact. And then the most important thing was to provide the glass with an environment that would ensure its long-term survival. That is, keep it dry. How do you do that? Well, you put protective glazing on the outside. And what you see here is a shot of the Great South Window dating to about, oh, that's a photograph, dating to about 2008, with all the protective glazing in place and all the stained glass in place and everything seeming hunky-dory. There is a close-up of the protective glazing, and if you look really carefully, you can actually see the stained glass through the outer layer. There's a gap between the two, there's a certain distance between the two so that there is enough ventilation going around. It's a bit out of focus. The reason for that may be because my hand was shaking so much. There is that stone that the Dean mentioned earlier that fell out. And if you think that one of the ancestors of Christ is that size, that's you know, a life-sized figure there, seated, but a life-sized figure. That's not a small piece of stone. So our architect and our structural engineer and our master mason went up in a cherry picker and found this. The window was tearing itself to pieces. And this was all new damage or old damage that had been repaired previously and had opened again. As a bit of a shocker, and one of the things that became clear was we need to get load-bearing scaffolding on this window very quickly, and we need to evacuate the stained glass because more stones could fall out. So that's what we did. And not only 9 stained glass conservators, but all of the masons got a crash course on how to evacuate the glass out of the window. That's one of the masons, in fact. But it was possible to do this quickly and easily because the protective glazing system was in place. And we didn't have to board up, the protective glazing stayed in place, and the ancestors were given a temporary home in the stained glass studio. What followed was years of investigations into the structure itself, into the changes that it had undergone over the years, into the makeup of the individual pieces of stone. This gives you an idea of how much of a patchwork this window had become, because of course it had been repaired in 1790 and then rebuilt using some of the old stone, but in the intermittent years, every 40 to 60 years, more repairs were done. The historical research showed that, in fact, this window misbehaved at regular intervals. A certain combination of circumstances had to come together to produce a perfect storm, if you will. And then suddenly this thing produced these terrifying cracks. Now, I won't go into detail because that's an hour and a half talk, but the upshot of all these investigations was the decision to do exactly what they did in 1790, to take all the stonework out and rebuild, using, where possible, surviving medieval stone that was in good condition. And here you can see our masons taking down the great south window. I love this photograph. It looks like Tony Long here, our master mason, is lifting that enormous stone just by sheer strength. But in fact, there is a block and tackle up here. So. Cheating. And so what is happening as we speak? Well, it's a bit late in the UK, but what is happening now is our masons are recarving this enormous window out of new French stone. And this work is done by hand. Everything is measured by hand, templated by our incredibly talented, gifted setting out mason, and is then carved by people that have decades of experience, but also by very, very young apprentices, which is incredibly exciting for them to have that opportunity. And so, hopefully, within a 2.5 year period, we will have a new home for the ancestors of Christ, one that will hopefully last for many, many more centuries. And do come and visit it when it's all done, or come before it, because you'll get a chance of seeing the work actually being carried out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Léonie, for that very interesting insight into what is involved in preserving the fabric of a historic building. And apologies for that little technical glitch. Our final participant in this afternoon's program is Tom Lee. Tom Lee is a professional storyteller with 20 years' experience performing traditional stories, folk tales, and myths for adults and children. Tom's repertoire is a rich trove of myths and stories from cultures around the world dating back for centuries. Tom began researching traditional stories while living in Scotland. His first performances were late-night tellings of Grimm's fairy tales in a tiny theatre in the back of a pub named, appropriately, The Man in the Moon. This program was presented at the Edinburgh Festival and subsequently on BBC TV. While researching stories in Ireland, Tom encountered evidence of a distant storyteller in his own family. Morrow O'Lee was a Galway villager in the 1700s who, according to a skeptical letter in the Royal Irish Academy, frequently told wild tales to his credulous neighbors. As an arts and education performer, Tom Lee brings his deeply engaging storytelling programs to students aged from kindergarten through grade 12, shaping each performance uniquely to suit each individual school audience. Tom also performs for adults in theaters and festivals throughout the country. He is also a frequent guest at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where he brings together his passion for research, art, and story, ever connecting with new audiences. In addition, he is a performing arts partner with the Yale Center for British Art. Today, Tom will present a reading from Canterbury Tales. Please welcome Tom Lee.
Good afternoon, and thank you. It's one thing to bring coals to Newcastle. It's very much another thing to bring tales to Canterbury, but that is what I was asked to do today. And I had, in fact, prepared a reading, and then when I got here, Jennifer very kindly said, no, you're a storyteller. Tell the story. So I'm going to be doing something for you that I frequently do for middle school children. I'm presumptuously retelling Chaucer's tale. But I want to piggyback on Léonie's images to make a metaphor for what goes on with telling and retelling. It's very much like taking those precious fragments of glass and disassembling and reassembling, assembling them in a new context for a new audience. Somehow, the DNA, the original intention of the artwork, the scriptural story, or the tale, it somehow lives through all those different manifestations. And the story that I'm going to tell you, The Pardoner's Tale, one of the tests for a story being a folk tale at its core is that if you hear it once, could you tell it again? It's one way that scholars will differentiate between a literary story and a folk tale. And The Pardoner's Tale, very much at its core, I'm convinced, is a traditional folk tale, just because of the ease with which it tells of these rioters, these three young men from Flanders, who were sitting in a tavern even before the bell of prime had rung in the morning, and they were drinking. After a night of gambling, after a night of women, after a night of song, they were drinking and drinking, and in the height of their riotous fun, they heard a bell, a little bell clanging out in the street. And one of them looked up and said to the innkeeper, "What's that noise? What's that bell? Go see what's happening here." And the innkeeper said, "Gentlemen, a little respect. It's a corpse bell. That bell is being carried in front of a coffin on its way to the grave. A little respect." "A corpse? Another one dead?" said one of them. "They're dying by the droves in this town." The page spoke up. He said, "Yes, that man, he was standing on his feet just last night drinking, but that thief, Death, came and cut him down. And now he's dead. Death has stolen his life." The innkeeper said, "The boy's right. Death is like a thief. It comes every night over and over and takes the lives of old and young and men and women." And the three rioters sitting at the table, they said, "Who is this Death? Exactly who does he think he is, stealing the lives of the young? He better not meet with us. He better stay away from us, because if we find this Death, Death will die." "Gentlemen," said one, "how about it this morning, right here and now? We'll do the world a favor, the three of us. We'll go and we'll find this Death, and we'll rid the world of him." And the three men stumbled, staggered up on their feet, and they swore a pact of brotherhood. Then and there, nothing would break up this pact, these three. They would go and find Death, and they would kill him. And they stumbled out into the daylight, and they stumbled down the road, not far, half a mile or so from the inn, where at the side of the road sat an old man. No, an old man. No, an old man. And he said, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Where do you travel in such haste?" And he said, "Never mind that. Who are you? And how do you get to be so old? People in this neighborhood are dying. Children, young men, younger than us, in the prime of their life, they're dropping dead. And you sit here, old? What? You're a friend of Death? Is that it? Gentlemen, gentlemen, he said, I have tried many times to trade away my age for youth, but no one would make the deal. Would you? Never mind that, they said. You're on good terms with death. Death is your friend. If you know where death is, you'd better tell us now, because we're looking for death. Are you indeed? 3 fine young men searching for death. Sounds strange, said the old man. But if you seek to find him, I can tell you exactly where he is. Indeed, I left death not far ago. Beyond that hill, just the other side, there's an oak tree. Go on, off the path, over the hill, under the oak tree. You can't miss him. Death is waiting for you, and he's not afraid. Good day, gentlemen. And the 3 men went tearing off the path and up and over the hill. They saw the crest, the oak tree, the top of the leaves. They came over the side of the hill, and there among the roots of the tree, that ancient tree, there they saw 8 bushels of gold florins. 8 bushels of coins, and they were dripping out of the baskets. Death went out of their thoughts at once. Who cares about death? They said, look at this, gentlemen. Look, brothers, the stuff of life. Here it is. It's all ours. 8 bushels of gold. We'll take this home. We'll live. We'll gamble. We'll drink. We'll sing. We'll dance for the rest of our lives. Who needs death? We have life. And they clapped each other on the shoulders and congratulated one another. But one, the oldest, he said, now just a minute, brothers, just a minute. We can't go walking through the streets of the village carrying this gold. We'll be hung for thieves, for taking our own property. There's such a thing as the tax man. You've heard of him too. You know, we'll stay here till it gets dark. And then we'll carry the gold to my house or your house, if you prefer, anywhere we think safe, and we'll divide it up 3 even shares. But we're bound to get hungry waiting for dark. So I say this, we'll cast lots, and one of us will run to the market down in the village and bring back wine and bread. We'll sit here and eat and drink, and then when it's dark, we'll carry the gold safely home. A good plan, an excellent plan. The 3 sworn brothers, they cast their lots, and it fell to the youngest to run down to the marketplace, and he was off in a hurry, leaving 2 behind with the gold. 8 bushels. Nice, huh? Yeah, 8 bushels 3 ways. That would work out quite well. Yes, but I'm thinking. My math isn't that good, but 8 bushels 2 ways. Now that'd be something. Well, it would be something, but there's the 3 of us. Yeah, there's 3 of us now, but it doesn't have to stay that way. My friend, what are you thinking? Just suppose he were to come back, and just suppose you were to say, you weren't quite hungry yet. Work up a little appetite, for the bread and for the wine. A little wrestling. He's always saying what a great wrestler he is. You wrestle with him. And when you have him down on the ground, I'll take my sword right through one side and out the other. And then you come up behind him with your dagger straight in the heart. 2 ways. I like your math, my friend. I like it fine. Very well. We'll wait till he comes back, and we'll dispatch him. So they sat with the gold, waiting for their victim, who had run off quite innocently, quite happily down to the village. He got fine bread and good cheese, and on his way out of town, he made one more stop at the apothecary. And he said, terrible problem these days, rats in the basement. And there's a polecat in the yard eating the chickens. Do you have poison? Something good and strong. Got to get rid of these rats. Well, there's one, said the apothecary, but I tell you, size of the grain of rice, one drop of this, it's enough to kill any man. You've got to be careful with this stuff. I'll take it, he said. And then off he ran and got 3 fine bottles, and in 2 of the bottles he put the poison. And he filled them generously with fine wine, a good last supper they'd have. 2 out of the 3. And he ran on back to give the fools their meal. Well, he's back, they said. Where have you been? What took you so long? We'll have our snack, but you know, I've had it with you and you're threatening to down me with wrestling. Before we eat, you and I, right here under this tree, let's have it out. A good wrestling match among brothers. Give him his last wish, the youngest thought, and he was on his feet. And they began their wrestling match. But it didn't get too many rounds before the third raised up his sword and in one side and out the other, and the other came up behind him and right through his heart, and he fell dead beneath the tree. And the other 2, well, you know, murder's thirsty work. But look, the fool brought us wine. Will have his own funeral feast. They did have 1 chance in 3, but they uncorked the bottle. They poured it out. They drank to their sworn brother. But by the time the sun had set on that oak tree by the hill, all 3 of those young men had found what they were looking for. All had found death. The Pardon's Tale. Thank you very much.